writing is like bearing some testimony.
Translating is like holding a dog on a long leash or a short leash.
My image was more than a lighthouse, the image of a lighthouse keeper.
I never translate literally. I think that's the kiss of death. The life of the mind is obviously an enormous field. And while we didn't, strictly speaking, prepare, Cécile and I have been talking over the last few days about what possible approaches might interest a broader group of people in terms of how we both approach the lives of our own minds and engaging with culture. And one thing that you said recently, Cécile, is that you saw that you can sometimes see a writer as a lighthouse. Maybe you could talk about that image that you came up with recently in terms of how you live out your life of the mind.
Thank you, first of all, for the invitation and also for being there. My image was more than a lighthouse, the image of a lighthouse keeper. So the person who is climbing up and up the lighthouse and who see the landscape or the seascape and who discovers it and who reports. I have the impression that I wouldn't speak about a mission or about a task or about something that has to be done, but I often feel that writing is like bearing some testimony, but not in the literal sense of the word. It's maybe I should say and tell the story. So what lighthouse keeper were meant to do, because nowadays there are no more people in lighthouses because all the signals, sounds and light are automatized, and so they don't need people climbing to the top and then going down. But at the time, and not such a long time ago, it was inhabited mostly or almost only with men, and they just had to keep lighthouse keeper, to keep the lighthouse clean and working, to put on the light in the evening. So that was in the end just like you put on the light in every room. And also if there was a shipwreck in front of them, they couldn't intervene because they shouldn't leave the lighthouse. A lighthouse should never be empty. And so they had to report on ground, and then the rescue boat would come to the place, to the shipwreck's place. And I have the feeling that writing is just the same, because you are witnessing what's happening. So it's not every time a shipwreck, of course, but sometimes it is. And then you just report, because you can't intervene as a writer on the reality. You can, as a citizen, you can, when you vote, you can in everyday life. But as a writer, you just look at, listen to, and then try to report your own perception of what's happening.
Is this a view that you had from the beginning, or is it one that's developed over the course of your now quite prolific career as a writer? You started in your 30s, so relatively late, but you've more than made up for that with the number of books that you've produced.
In my late 20s, in fact. But no, because when I began to write, I don't know, but you could tell us how it was for you when you began, for instance, to translate. But I had no vision at all. I just felt a kind of need, of necessity to write. Maybe because I didn't speak so much, and and so writing was the best way to express myself, but it was also a kind of natural continuity for reading. It was a kind of active reading, if I can say so. And so I had no vision of what, and no idea of what a writer could be. Was just writing, and had also no idea. Well, maybe I exaggerate a little, but still didn't know exactly what kind of things. Well, novels, but what kind of novels I wanted to write, and it came progressively. And with the experience, and with the distance, and maybe with age also, with being older. And I had always the feeling there is a life of the mind, a life of the writing, just exactly as there is a life for every one of us. There is a past, a present, and a future. And there is also a memory. And even if you don't remember what you wrote, there are such writers who know exactly by heart, who can quote their own writings. But I don't. I'm quite unable from doing this. And so I forget. But I suppose the preceding books build kind of of layers which are unconscious, but which are present in some way. I couldn't explain, and that brings experience. Just as in everyday life, things you are living through bring you some experience, even if you don't remember exactly what you've been through. And so it's exactly the same with writing. But could you tell us how was translating for you at the beginning, and if it became something quite different?
I think I was motivated by more selfish reasons than you. I was interested in translation as a way to figure out how to, well, as forcing myself to read more closely. No one reads as closely as a translator, I believe, not even an editor, and I've worked as both. Translation requires a level of engagement with the text that really, unless you're very disciplined as a reader and a thinker, you don't necessarily bring to the text in front of you. And so I was interested in how the books and texts, poems, whatever, that I found inspiring, how they worked. Why did they work? So why was this writer's style so much more interesting to me than another's, even though they might be equally elaborate or refined? And so it was more to figure out things for myself. And then eventually, as I did it, maybe it's justification, maybe, retrospective explanation, but at some point it became an equal motivation was I've gotten this experience from this German or French text, and I would like to recreate that for the English reader. You know, this text means so much to me. I would like to share it. But really, I think I started from a much more self-centered, self-interested perspective.
I wouldn't put it that way. I think what you describe is a kind of intellectual starting point. And then I think you wrote also something about it. It's more, or it became something, we could say almost more political. Because it's a question of bringing, of importing or bringing other countries, other cultures into the own country, and so there is this idea which is I wouldn't say, which isn't mainstream at all nowadays, of exchange and of dialogue between the languages and between cultures.
Yeah, it's true. There's a narrowing of the mind, certainly in the United States, and unfortunately increasingly in Britain. We're such monolingual societies, and English has become an invasive species around the world that you know, speaking to an audience, an Indian audience, many, if not all of you, are bilingual, trilingual, probably quadrilingual. You don't understand. I mean, you probably can only imagine how suffocating it is to feel constrained into monolingual channels, the way that some forces in the United States and in Britain are trying to do. There's a lack of interest, and so with time, it's my sense of translation as what political aspects there are to translation, for me, became very much that of broadening the possibilities of English by stress testing it against other languages. There was a writer from a small country, unfortunately, I can't remember which one. I think it was Albania, or maybe it was Moldavia. And he was asked, why, if you only have several 100,000 speakers, should works from other countries other languages be translated into your language? And he said, we need these works translated into Albanian, say, because we want our language to be able to play on the world stage, to be invigorated by these other languages, not to just atrophy and die by, you know, these artificial constraints. All languages have benefited from each other. So it's true, there is that political aspect, but it came, that came later. Because I grew up bilingual, and then the third language was added later. So I took it for granted for a very long time that this is just the way people navigate in the world. But here it is, but not at home, sadly.
I have two different sentences and positions in mind as you were speaking about different languages and the overwhelming, you could say, English language. It's one is from Umberto Eco, who said translation is the language of Europe. And it tells many things in just a few words. And the other thing, the other position, but I unfortunately can't remember the name, the writer's name, the name of the writer who said that. But I happened to meet, it was a writer's meeting more than 20 years ago in South Korea. And there were people, most of them coming from Asia. And one writer, very impressive, came from Taiwan. And he just said, I'm not interested in translation. I don't want my books to be translated into another language because I'm writing for my own people, and I don't want anything I don't see anything further. It's just for them. It has to stay in Taiwan, and I was well. It made me think, because I don't know what is your reaction, but I think this position is both impressive and in a certain way I don't understand it, because I think writing is also a question of opening new ways, new fields, and translation is also a way of opening. And I don't know. Then I thought maybe it has to do because Taiwan is an island, and so how do you say? Yes, and there are of course many. The situation is menacing,
yes.
and so it's a kind maybe of self-defense. I don't know.
There's another writer who shared that same view, and that was the Irish writer Martin O'Kine. He believed that his books were so good that people should learn Irish to read them. So it was not just a strong sense of self, but also it was very much a reaction against the hegemony of English and the presence, shall we say, of the British on Irish. On the Irish island.
But it's interesting because an island is also an island.
Yeah, and so perhaps it's very much an insular thinking.
Maybe.
Yeah. But I'd like to return to the Lighthouse, since we're on an island again, and complicate your view a little bit of the writer as a lighthouse keeper, because you see yourself as bearing witness, a kind of witness, and noticing things, and yet your books are very layered. We talked about this as well earlier when we did the book launch at Seagull. The book in particular that I translated of Cécile's is called Nevermore. The premise is of the main character, the narrator, is a translator of English into French, and she's translating Virginia Woolf. A friend of hers dies, and she feels that it's one way of handling her grief would be to translate the time passes section. So a passage about a chapter about the passage of time, destruction, loss, and then eventual recovery. But so that's one way of bearing testimony. But Cécile also weaves in reflections on music, on contaminated spaces like Chernobyl, or the High Line, the abandoned railway station in New York City. You bring in literature and all sorts of other themes, and you weave these in layers that are, I think, require an approach to writing that is more than just the flashing of the perception. And so I'm wondering how the layering, your very subtle and sophisticated approach to layering different levels of a text, different elements of a text, fit with or don't fit, maybe just simply contradict. We can live with contradictions. Your view of the artist, writer as a lighthouse keeper.
Well, I didn't mean bearing or writing as a witness or witnessing things in a realistic way, because I don't write realistic novels. It doesn't interest me, and realistic novels don't really interest me also as a reader. I'm looking for something else, and well, I may read things I would never write, but I also read things which, or books, not things, which are could go in the same direction, where I'm trying to go to, and so those different layers you were speaking of. I don't know, it's difficult to explain, but there are different layers of time, because I feel, for instance, that writing only in the present tense, which is how most of the books in France, for instance, are written. Well, for me, there is something lacking. Like it would be just two-dimensional books, and I'm longing for a third dimension. And what is this third dimension? It's there are several ways of explaining it, or of trying to perceive it. It can be something. So it is not plain, just telling a story. Of course, when you write a novel, it has to do with time, because it takes time to write a novel. And the novel is also, it's not just like a poem you could write even if you work on it after, on the spur of the moment, because it's a kind of short distance. A novel, also a short novel, is, however, long distance, and so you have to work with time, and you have to work about time. And so in your novel, I feel the novel could be more complete in a certain way, with the whole spectrum of times, that is past, present, and future, maybe. So that would be something dense and thicker, as just telling a story from A to Z or A to B, and
chronologically.
Thank you. I don't think I will repeat. And just from the beginning to the end. Of course, there is a beginning to the book, and there is also an end, but what happens in between is just not only a straight line. It has to do with circles, with ways which don't lead to something definite. And so in this way, this third dimension doesn't have only to do with time, but only with, I don't want to sound too mystical, but with something like a secret or a mystery, something that is not obvious, and that has to be discovered. That has to be discovered, first of all, by myself, while writing, because when I begin to write, I absolutely do not know where I will land, so to say. I just have a starting point. But that's also the good part of writing, because it's like a thriller. Well, you have a kind of suspense. What will come next? Yeah. Even if it's not really a plot, which is the main thing. And so that is also part of this third dimension, and part of those layers. And I have been writing since maybe or for 10 years or more, in different direction. I could use another kind of image where there is a minimal plot, which would be like in on a square, which would be at the center of the square, as you have I don't know, a monument or a statue in the center, at the center of the square, and then you have different avenues or streets. departing, coming from the center. And so in Nevermore, for instance, one street would be the High Line. Another street would be Chernobyl. Another street would be the lighthouses. And the kern, the core is this translating process of time passes from to the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. So it's not for free. I mean, it's not. It has a meaning. It's not just by chance. It's just like threads. You are drawing from a core, and which as a square leads you in many directions. But all those multiple directions are they have a common yes, they come together. They have something in common. They are linked between them. And that is something very important for me, that although it could look like something fragmentary, in fact, there is a continuity.
I do have a question, but I just want to say before that in Richard Flanagan's recent book, Question 7, he's from New Zealand. He talks about how the Maori have a verb tense that encompasses past, present, and future, and what might be but wasn't. So you'll have to learn Maori, I think, for your next book.
That's my next mission.
I'm also interested, or maybe just associating, or trying to I guess, take apart the way, the comments that you've made about how you approach writing. And it seems to me, both from what you've said and from reading the book, that metaphorical thinking is really a big part of the way that you approach the world. I'll just read maybe to give everyone a sense about the tone of the book a little bit. At one point, the narrator, as she struggles to bring Virginia Woolf into English, there are often these asides about translation. And one of them, she says, so many hesitations and approximations. And she's talking about translation specifically. So many hesitations and approximations. The approach is gradual, made by stages, like a landing, a slow descent. Sometimes we reascend in a reworked version that is worse than the previous one. Then we return to the lower altitude and keep descending until the moment of relief when the wheels finally touch ground. The image isn't perfect, of course. It depends, after all, on how you look at it. It's not that the translation is above the original, although it hovers. At first, it floats, untethered, then gradually nears its foundation. The rendition of the text is in sight. It takes on contours. More precise forms emerge, and the moment arrives when it rests on a solid base, on firm ground. So it strikes me that the narrator is describing translation, but it could very well be you talking about writing.
Yes, it's also a series of approximations, because I'm just writing a first draft and then let it rest in a way, and then taking it back and then rest. And so this movement from to and fro, which can last a whole year or 2 years or more or a little less. And yes, it has to be so because, well, once more, if you just write things that are obvious, well, that's my opinion. You don't need to write. And you don't need such books because you already, there were so many which have been written in this way. And what is new when you read the book, what I am looking for when I read the book is to have a kind, so it's a kind of paraphrase of To the Lighthouse, a kind of vision. And so a vision is not simply a view. That is to say, there is something between you and the reality. A kind of filter is not such a beautiful word, but something.
A screen? A screen?
A screen or a kind of telescope is a little bit far away, but something like yes, different colors you can different touches you can give to your perception of reality. But if we come back to translating, because I feel maybe I'm wrong, but that translating is different from writing in the way that the text you are going to translate is like a basis. You don't have to build it. It's there. It's already there. And my question to you would be how free do you feel towards the text? Do you feel like a prisoner for what is written, or do you feel like yes, flying a little away in order to be more faithful sometimes to this written text?
It varies very much depending on the text, and again, it's a very subjective scale for me. So there are some texts where I really feel it does more service to the book that I'm translating to take freedoms and liberties, and maybe rearrange a sentence in a way that might not be considered faithful to the author's style, but to my ear and in my reading renders what the author was saying or trying to convey better than a more literal translation. I never translate literally. I think that's the kiss of death. But the question to me more is what is important about the author's style? How does he or she achieve that? Is it through diction or register? How far does he or she stray from the conventions of the English language? And then here we have the difficulty as well that there are many Englishes that the publishing industry in America and the UK don't necessarily recognize. And who is it that decides what these conventions are, and what are the conventions that the writer was working within or against? And so it's really kind of a shifting I don't know, chessboard maybe, to think metaphorically. It's funny, I mean, there are so many metaphors for translation, whether it's a dog on a short, whether translating is like holding a dog on a long leash or a short leash. And, so I would say my leash length varies. Or, is the translator like a musician interpreting a score, a composer transposing a piece of music for another instrument, a landscape painter painting a landscape with a different color palette than what is, or making a copy of a painting with a different palette of colors, a chef trying to create a dish with different ingredients. Is the translator a pane of glass, or is it, as the Hebrew poet, I think it was Amichai, said, translation is like kissing through a veil. So all these metaphors are inadequate. They capture something of the translation process, but they're all inadequate. And so for a while, I gave a lecture about translation a few years ago, and I think you read it. The metaphor that I was settling on most recently was photography, because there are so many more elements to photography than to, say, copying the picture, a landscape painting. And that is that photography is capturing an elusive whole, a three-dimensional object, in two dimensions in a way that some of those other metaphors don't capture. So you have the subject, the text, which is seen from a certain angle, which is the lighting or the shutter speed. And is it black and white? Is it in color? What elements do you play with? What kind of exposure are you going to give it? When is it being looked at? What will the viewer interpret? What will they bring to viewing the picture? So I've come to think that translation is quite an unstable act or creation, and so these metaphors that used to feel kind of inadequate seem increasingly inadequate to me. So that's a very long-winded way of answering your question, but I just want to read a brief passage of how the narrator thinks about translation, or thought about translation. She's recalling this friend whom she lost, who was a writer, and the narrator says, "I told her that when I receive a work to translate, I feel like I'm seeing a charging wild animal. It frightens me. The entire difficulty lies in taming it. I need to read the new text right away. I put everything else aside to reassure myself, to confirm that, for all its challenges and serious obstacles, I can manage it. Then the wild animal becomes less threatening. I just have to feed it according to its expectations, to talk and to listen to it." This made her laugh, and despite my experience, until now, each wild animal has allowed itself to be tamed. The fear remains. Each new arrival brings with it the risk that the wild animal will devour me, and the fear only dissipates after I've read the whole text. You've recently translated 3 Guineas. Was it a wild animal at first?
Well, that's what I wrote there is really autobiographical. I can say it's really the way I feel, and I am always afraid I won't be able to do it. And so, yes, with 3 Guineas, it was a little bit different because I already knew the text. So that kind of reaction is more with text you don't know yet. And because there are some translators, because I happen to translate also some texts from the English and sometimes from the German language. And so I've lost what I wanted to say. 3 Guineas, I knew. Yes, there are some translators who say they don't need to read the text, the whole text, the whole book, before ever beginning to translate. They prefer to discover the text progressively while they are translating it. I couldn't do it because I'm too anxious that, yes, like a wild animal, that there would be, how do you say, the pièges? Traps in which I would fall. There are traps anyway, but a trap you already know is a little less a trap than a trap you absolutely discover at the last moment. And 3 Guineas, it's a little bit different because I already translated The Waves, so another novel from Virginia Woolf. I wanted, it's not directly connected with your question, but I feel it's something interesting about fiction and about the way, at least in France, where people lost the idea of fiction. Because in France it's very much trendy to write, and it's coming also to Germany about one's own life. And so about, I don't know, my mother died, I will write about her death. I was ill, I will write about my illness. I had a difficult love story, I will write about this difficult love story, and so on. And so when the book Nevermore had been published in France, one question I've rather often been asked is, when will your translation to the Lighthouse will be published? And so it's typical for this loss of feeling for fiction, and I always answered, but there is no translation. I didn't translate to the Lighthouse, and I could add something else. I can't translate it anymore because it's the novel and it has to remain as a fiction. So I am not allowed anymore to translate to the Lighthouse.
Yeah. One thing that we were talking about recently as well, which I think illuminates, it's a parallel track to the idea of translation and metaphorical thinking, is your interest in transpositions from one genre into another, whether it's, or sort of a two-way communication between writing and music, or music and film, excuse me, or, painting and music. And you recently wrote a cycle of novels that incorporate different art genres into the book, into your writing, or into the fiction. Could you talk a little bit about why you chose, or why you felt it necessary to explore this kind of artistic transposition through fiction?
Yeah, I had maybe two reasons for doing it. One is, the search, as you said, for metaphors. And I was thinking art is a wonderful metaphor for a world. And speaking about art, different forms of art, is also speaking about our life, about the world as it is, but in a metaphorical way. And it has also to do with the growing interest for artistic expression. Also, if we are always thinking there is not interest enough, but if you consider the whole the story of humanity, the whole story, the big picture, in our times there are many more people interested or who can have access to artistic expressions than it ever was. And for instance, the huge queues for major exhibitions that didn't exist I don't know, that had not existed for 40, 50 years. I still remember, well, it was quite a long time ago, but it was a kind of landmark and also an exception. That was the exhibition first in London and then in Paris about Ramses II.
Yeah.
And it was for the first time that you could see huge queues. I must confess, I don't know how it is in India, how it is in Mumbai, but I suppose it could be the same. You could tell us how it is. So that was also a reason. Speaking about art is also a way of speaking about our times, even if it's an indirect way. And there were other reasons, because in those novels, art is considered from both, from 2 points of view. The point of view of the artist's point of view, but also the audience, you could say, point of view. And so comes the question of the reception of a work of art. How is it that some movies, paintings, books, music pieces are successful, even short after they were created, and why others are not successful or just successful progressively with the time? How does it work? And that was part of my questioning, and I thought maybe I could write novels to try to find an answer that I didn't find, of course, but it was a question. And the other thing, on a quite different point of view, is that I had the strange feeling that each novel I wrote and each novel being published destroyed the preceding one, because it was like islands, and everyone was lonely in a big ocean of infinity and lost, and so you got maybe the attention drawn on one of the islands, but the other ones didn't exist anymore. And so I thought I would like to write a very thick novel, which would occupy my time, which, yes, it would take me maybe 10 years or more to write it. Mm-hmm. But I cannot. Unfortunately, I'm not such a writer. And then I try to console myself by thinking about sport, about swimming, for instance, or racing. Well, there are people who can swim 500 meters and others just 50 meters or 1 kilometer, and they are not the same sports people. So my distance is not 1,000 pages. It's more about 200, 220, 50. So I cheated. And I thought, well, I can't write a 1,000 pages novel, but what I could try to write is 200 pages novels. And that would do 1,000 in the end. Yeah. And so the trick was, and I managed doing it. And it took me about 12 years between the first one and the last one. And so in each novel, it's about different art, about music, sculpture, video, photography, and literature. That's 5.
Yeah. And how was it a different experience integrating or working with each genre? Did the experience or the intellectual challenge differ when you had the material of the different various art forms to make it into fiction?
It was really an experience because I only knew the first one will be about music, about contemporary music, and the last one about literature. But I had no idea what would come in between, and also what kind of arts. And each time it came when I was finished with one novel. And so I suppose, because that's when I began to work with different kinds of art, which I continued in Nevermore, which was the novel written just after this cycle. And I wanted also to say, but of course, you must read it very carefully and have the wish to read it like that, in the continuity. There are themes, topics, which are main topics in one of the novels and which appear but as more as undercurrents in other novels. And in this way, it is connected. And the difficult thing was what can I write after having written this cycle, which took 12 years of my writing time, and then came Nevermore, and I don't think, or I hope it's not a narcissistic question, but speaking about translating Nevermore, it's more about the process of translating, because as it is a novel about translation and from the English language into French, how was it? Did you work in a different way than with other books? Because the very difficult thing is how can you... So the origin is an English text, literary text by Virginia Woolf, and then in the process of the book and describing process of translating, the narrator tries different ways of translating one sentence or two sentences. And how did you manage? Because when I read the English book, it was like something magical. How did you manage to convey this translating process into English, which was the original language? It's something crazy. And I don't know, have you got the French copy?
I do have the French copy.
Because it's a work of art in itself, I think.
I had to color code my different strategies. But maybe, would you like to read the opening in English?
Yes, to give an example.
But read it because, that way everyone can get a sense of whether it works or not.
But we talk a little bit, that's the only thing we really prepared, to come back to your spontaneity, and we didn't rehearse at all, but we thought if we have the opportunity to read a passage from the book, which wasn't sure at all that we would do. Maybe it would be more pleasant to do it with two voices. And alternatively, so I would read, I can begin if you like, and then
so
you can
read the first
go
section.
on. Yeah. Well, we must wait for the future to show, said Mr. Banks, coming in from the terrace. We must wait for the future to appear, said Mr. Banks, coming in from the terrace. We must wait and see what the future brings, said Mr. Banks, entering from the terrace. We must wait for the future to show, said Mr. Banks, as he entered the house from the terrace. We must see what the future has in store, said Mr. Banks, coming in from the terrace. Let's see what the future has in store. Let us wait and see what the future... Well, we must wait for the future, said Mr. Banks, entering from the terrace. There once was a woman who wrote in a large city, a capital. She wrote about a house lost on a coast, a place she had stopped going long before, and she wrote about a lost time, or rather, about the passage of time. A writer who was trying to capture the moment, as she said, but also trying to capture traces of human presence in eternity.
Trying to capture them in a book called To the Lighthouse, a title translated into French as La Promenade au Phare, the stroll to the lighthouse. The movement of the word to is implicit in the word promenade, but can you call taking a boat to a lighthouse a stroll? Aren't strolls, by definition, taken on solid ground? Later, there will be other versions of the title. Voyage au phare, trip to the lighthouse, vers le phare, au phare, bound for the lighthouse, toward the lighthouse. All of them run aground somewhat on the obviousness of to and are unable to reproduce it. The first German translation is called Die Fahrt zum Leuchtturm, the trip to the lighthouse, and a more recent version is Zum Leuchtturm, to the lighthouse. German offers more opportunities for a literal translation than French because it can trace the English construction. But this result is compact, the syllables too dense compared to the airy sound of the English title. Perhaps that's why the first translation added Die Fahrt, the equivalent of the French promenade, but unlike promenade, Fahrt contains the idea of a distance to be covered, one that generally requires some means of transport, which could be a boat or a sailboat. In this sense, Voyage au phare would be the most exact, with the same number of syllables as the English title and its light, breezy tone. Even if voyage or journey seems a bit exaggerated for a simple crossing, an excursion. But didn't this journey last more than 10 years? And who can measure the duration of a journey? It begins long before the simple transit and ends long after, if it ever does end. So I hope you can get a sense from this passage of how the narrator takes the original sentence of Virginia Woolf, which is kept in italics in the text, and thinks about the different variations in French which work for this reason or don't work for that reason. And it's a process of refinement, which is really, I think, everyone's experience of translation. So what I had to do, I thought that it would wear on the reader to always go through the different French variations, some of which were more translatable, more interesting, more telling than others. So in my color-coded system, I had the yellow ones, which was what happened in the passage that I just read, is where I echoed in English the variations in French. So I go through in English all the variations that the narrator tries out. With the blue, I cut some of these variations because they didn't add anything to to the reader's experience of the text. For example, there's one sentence that says, "Were they allies? Were they enemies?" There are just not that many things that you can vary with that in English. So I left that. And with the darker yellow, I left the French in when Cécile was making a point about the way French works or doesn't work, doesn't fit well with the English, whether it's, they use verb tenses differently, or the word order, or punctuation, then I would leave the French in. And it was obvious to people who didn't, the people who don't speak French don't miss anything, because you've got the original by Virginia Woolf, and then you've got the different points that are being made between the languages, which are accessible to everyone. So my hope is that these three different approaches not only keep the process of translation front and center in the reader's mind and give people who don't translate or who don't have access to multiple languages a sense of what it's like to navigate between them, but also to shine a very sharp light on Virginia Woolf's style, and to have the reader think about how she plays with and against conventional English of her time, the way that the translators have to think about. So I have to admit that several times during the process, I really thought that it was not going to work, that it was a failed experiment, and my gratitude to Seagull increased for allowing me the freedom to try out this hopeless experiment, which it succeeds even in its failure, I would say, at least from my point of view.
I wouldn't say it's a failure. It's really a success, and something where you can see in the same language, which never happens, the process of translating, because it's like translating English into English, and so you can see the discrepancies with between the variations and Virginia Woolf's writing, and so you can all the more or all the most admire the way she's writing, and see how translating is also a matter, a question of different approaches, but it's never exactly the text, the original text. But it doesn't matter, because it brings to you, texts, books you would never read, because they are not written in a language you know about. But have you got, generally speaking, to elaborate strategies when you translate, or is it just an exception? And for
it's an exception, but it's not the only time. But it doesn't happen very often. There aren't that many, I was going to say writers, but perhaps I should say books, that pose these kinds of challenges. But sometimes, I'll keep a style sheet, or I'll keep track of when I've, say, taken liberties or decided that maybe this solution will work. For example, a book I did 2 years ago by a German writer who also translated Nevermore, actually. She wrote a novel in verse based on the life of a woman a true woman, who fought in the French Resistance as a 19-year-old, and then ended up becoming a neurologist and joining the effort, assisting the effort, the Algerian liberation movement. And because this novel was written in verse, and it was a very rhythmically inflected, loose, free verse that was specific to the language it was written in, further complicated by the fact that this author writes in both French and German. So the two originals were quite different. One was dictated by the rhythm of the German language, one was dictated by the rhythm of the French language. Certain historical facts were explained for German readers. Facts about French history were explained for German readers, that not for French, but on the other hand, facts about German history had to be worked in for the French reader. So I had to triangulate between those two versions and two languages, and yet find one that was consistent, a tone and a form that worked consistently in English. So in that case, that was also a
challenge.
I had to think about it. I mean, I had some false starts. I thought, oh, iambic pentameter is the standard epic form, so I'll try and do it in iambic pentameter. That certainly didn't work. And I thought, well, maybe just prose, and that was even worse. So there were false starts and failures, but it required experimentation, which I think I would have to say is also how I settled on this strategy. Was, it was clear to me that these pages were not working in English. So what did I have to change to keep the reader's attention and the flow of the novel? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.